if you get hit by a truck with no insurance and you get hurt, you can't sue, question mark. You're just out of luck. That is probably one of the most common questions we get. And Les and I handle that all the time. That's kind of our starting point when we actually meet with people. That's a very common question, Lily. Thank you for that. But our starting point is to evaluate the owner and or the driver of the at-fault vehicle. And sometimes those people are one and the same. Sometimes they are different. And we look at the owner first. If, let's say, that person let their insurance lapse, but they're driving somebody else's car, in that situation, you would actually be able to pursue the driver even though they do not own the vehicle. But if the owner and driver, let's say they are the same thing, then you would not be able to pursue either of them. And when I say pursue, we mean pursue and collect. You can always pursue someone despite them having insurance. That is not a requirement to sue somebody. But it kind of is trying to squeeze blood out of a turnip, which you can't really do sometimes. So
no, yeah, I mean, it really, we see all the time people come in and they've got a very legitimate case, liability is clear, they have real injuries, but you run into a situation where there is either very limited insurance coverage or no insurance coverage whatsoever. One of the problems is that in the state of Florida, you do not have to carry bodily injury liability coverage, which is the type of insurance that if you cause a wreck and you injure someone, your bodily injury liability coverage is what compensates that person for their injuries, for their lost wages, their pain and suffering, things like that. The state of Florida is the only state in the entire country that doesn't require that type of coverage. Every other state requires it with at least $25,000, most of them, in liability coverage, $25,000 per person, $50,000 per occurrence. And so when you're talking to these other states, you know, I can't imagine. I know we got our share of bad drivers around here, but I just came from Tallahassee dropping my kids off. I'm now officially an empty nester, and there's some pretty bad drivers over there too. You're more likely than not going to get hit by somebody that has very limited coverage, which is why we always recommend that you purchase uninsured motorist coverage. Brian, why don't you tell everybody what uninsured motorist is and why it's so important?
And we say uninsured motorist coverage, but it's uninsured in Florida. It's uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. That is the type of coverage that kicks in the event the at-fault or responsible party does not have sufficient bodily injury coverage. And like Les said, number one, in Florida, you are not required to carry bodily injury coverage. So just because someone runs a red light and hits you, it doesn't mean that they even have insurance coverage at all to compensate you for your injuries. And number two, it's a very high amount of people do not even carry insurance. Right. Now, it's not every other person, but there's a significant amount of people who either have no insurance, who have insurance but no bodily injury coverage, right, or at a minimum have $10,000 in bodily injury coverage. And if someone blows through a red light and hurts you, I mean, $10,000 is going to be a drop in the bucket. Right. So that uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage steps in to protect you, your family, or anybody inside your vehicle in the event you're hit by somebody who does not have sufficient insurance coverage.
Right, and going back to the original, what you were saying at the very beginning, you know, you can still pursue a claim. I mean, just because there's no insurance coverage doesn't mean you cannot pursue a claim. The only problem is it becomes a question of collectability. So you can file the lawsuit, which is going to take a filing fee. You've got to serve the other side with process. That's going to be a process server fee. You have to gather your evidence. There's going to be depositions that have to be taken. You got to pay court reporters. Every case that we file is required to go to mediation. You have to pay a mediator. If you want your doctors and your expert witnesses to show up at trial to testify, you have to pay them. And so even in a very basic, pretty straightforward personal injury case, you know, the attorneys are typically the ones that advance the money to pay those things. We advance our case costs for our client on the hope that we're going to be able to collect it back once we get a verdict. And sometimes those case costs can be, you know, for even a very simple trial, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 when you factor in all these costs with these experts. And so if you're looking at a situation where the at-fault driver doesn't have insurance, you have to do what we call an asset check. You have to look and see how do they look like they're collectible. Well, some things you got to know in Florida. Number one, if you have a house and you own your house and it's your homestead, you cannot collect it. If you have a pension, you can't get it. If you have certain types of retirement securities,
401k,
401k, IRA, you can't touch those things.
Social Security cannot touch.
Social Security can't touch it. And so you're basically limited. How much cash does this person have in the bank? Do they have any assets, non-exempt assets, extra cars, extra boats, extra motorcycles, jewelry, anything of value, but then you have to go and get it, and then you have to convert it to a judgment. It becomes a really, really difficult and onerous process. And so oftentimes, we have to have a very difficult conversation with our clients and say, look, we would love nothing more to do this, but what at the end of the day, you're going to end up throwing tens of thousands of dollars toward this case with a very, very, very slim likelihood of ever recovering anything unless they hit the lottery, which
Yeah,
we know what the odds are there. So, and it's very unfortunate. I really wish that we would change the insurance scheme in Florida to have people. Look, driving is a privilege, and people that are driving a car, it's not a right, it's a privilege. Going along with that privilege should be a certain amount of financial responsibility, and for whatever reason, our state just has not required that, and it's very disheartening. But we see people get hurt all the time, and nothing you can do for them.
No, and that's why you probably hear us say anytime we talk about injury claims, uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, and also stacking. If you have multiple vehicles, we say get stacking. That means if you have $25,000 in the UM coverage, but you have 4 vehicles, that magically turns into $100,000 per claim or $200,000 total for all available claimants. Right.